Jeffrey Sachs is a world-renowned economist and student of international relations. He is the author of many books, including To Move the World, um, JFK's
Quest for Peace.
Quest, Quest for Peace. Sorry about that. And I will just say this, if you're looking for somebody that embodies JFK's quest for peace today, we don't have to look any farther than our commentator this evening. Thank you very much, Jeff, for joining us.
Marty, thank you for that. And thank you, everybody, for gathering on this 62nd anniversary. Oh, my. Well, first, it's heartbreaking to listen what we lost. We certainly lost in our country the greatest statesman that we have had since Franklin Roosevelt, and a man who, in the year of that speech, was leading the world to peace and leading the world in an absolutely gifted way. Everyone should remember that it was just a few weeks after this speech that the US and the Soviet Union did sign the Partial Nuclear Test Ban Treaty. President Kennedy was proved absolutely correct. The treaty held. It was in the mutual interest of both sides. And as he said in the speech, it itself became a crucial stepping stone to a treaty a few years later, the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. The speech was not only a speech of genius, it was a speech of remarkable persuasion. Persuasion in its logic and persuasion in its compassion. And when the speech was received by the Soviet chairman, Nikita Khrushchev, he immediately summoned the American envoy in Moscow, Averell Harriman, to say that this speech was the finest speech by an American president since Franklin Roosevelt, and, crucially, that he, Khrushchev, wanted to make peace with President Kennedy. In other words, the speech worked. It was a practical speech, as well as a completely timeless speech. When we listen to it just now, there's not a word that needs to be changed to be applicable to our own time. What is terrifying is how the wisdom is not heeded in our time. We have absolutely departed from the profound insights that President Kennedy shared with us. One of the reasons why President Kennedy reached this depth of understanding and this level of stunning eloquence, and by the way, let us remember his partner in both the substance and in the eloquence, Theodore Sorensen, who was completely a partner in this speech in every way. One of the reasons that Kennedy reached this level of insight and wisdom and eloquence is that just a few months earlier, the world had nearly come to an end. The October 1962 Cuban Missile Crisis is the predicate of this speech. It's Kennedy's lessons derived from that most harrowing period. Kennedy and Khrushchev together saved the world in those days in October after having blundered the world to the very precipice of nuclear war. I always found it very touching, very moving, and profoundly sobering that President Kennedy came to office in January 20, 1961, determined to avoid war, fully aware of the dangers of stumbling into war, understanding the dangers of the nuclear age. And yet, despite all of that, absolutely playing a role in bringing the world to the very brink of nuclear annihilation. Let's just say that that was such a shocking period for both Kennedy and Khrushchev, and a moment in which both of them reached the realization that they were more partners than enemies in saving the world, and that they were each surrounded by warmongers, by naive advisors who, if the advice had been heeded, would have brought the world to nuclear war. So both Kennedy and Khrushchev, after this harrowing event in the Cuban Missile Crisis, realized how crucial it was to step back from the very edge of global destruction. And Kennedy succeeded in doing that. And this speech is a powerful part of Kennedy's quest for peace and his campaign for peace in 1963. I don't want to go through every bit of the speech in detail. We've just heard it. But I have to tell you, having read it dozens, maybe hundreds of times, and having watched it uh, innumerable times to write my book about this speech and about this year, even now, as I read it again just before our meeting, I find it astounding in its logic and power and eloquence. And I want to draw our attention to a few points. First, he says, "What kind of peace do I mean?" And he says, "Not a Pax Americana, but a genuine peace, the kind of peace that makes life on earth worth living." He immediately sets the stage that this is not some harsh condition. This is aiming for the good of the world. Then he talks about the new face of war. Total war makes no sense in an age when great powers can maintain large and relatively invulnerable nuclear forces and refuse to surrender without resort to those forces. That's the world that we are in today. Still, we're in a world of nine nuclear powers. This Russia, the successor state, the continuation state of the Soviet Union, has, as does the United States, 6,000 nuclear warheads, roughly 1,600 in active deployment. Neither side is going to be defeated before using those weapons. The idea, and we hear it every day, we should defeat Russia. We should defeat Putin. This is a mind-boggling miscalculation and misunderstanding. We are in the new face of war, and total war. Defeating Russia makes no sense in an age when great powers can maintain large and relatively invulnerable nuclear forces. Next, President Kennedy talks about the tragedy of the arms race, where he says that this accumulation of weapons never to be used is not the only, much less the most efficient means of assuring peace. And so he calls peace the necessary rational end of rational men. This is wonderful, but we barely hear it in our world today, that we should be pursuing peace. We don't hear it once by European leaders any day these days. It's it's so sad and so worrisome, but Kennedy gets it so right. Then he says one of the most amazing things in this speech: to achieve peace, we must re-examine our own attitude, for our attitude is as essential as theirs. When is the last time an American president didn't point a finger at the enemy, but said, let us reconsider our own assumptions. Well, by saying that, President Kennedy opened the way to peace. He opened the way to the heart and the mind of Nikita Khrushchev and his counterparts. And he enabled both sides to re examine their own attitudes. He says, let us examine our attitude towards peace itself because too many of us think it is impossible. We hear that all the time. Oh, you can't negotiate with Putin. But this is exactly what Kennedy was warning us against. This kind of pessimism that makes it seem that war is inevitable, that mankind is doomed, that we are gripped by forces we cannot control. We cannot accept that view, says President John F. Kennedy. And he's right. And then he talks about what kind of peace, a practical peace, a peace of many parts, a dynamic peace, a peace that changes to meet the challenge of each new generation. And he makes an astoundingly wise statement. For peace is a process, a way of solving problems. It's an approach, it's a technique. It's not simply an end state. It's the way that one approaches crises. And then he says, it doesn't require that we love each other as our neighbors, only that we can live together in mutual tolerance. So wise, so practical, and so correct. Now, how to get there? He has a line that is one of my favorites. I repeat it nonstop in my adult life. He says, by defining our goal more clearly, by making it seem more manageable and less remote, we can help all peoples to see it, to draw hope from it, and to move irresistibly toward it. This was Kennedy's style of leadership. Define a clear goal, show that it can be achieved, and thereby give hope, thereby have people draw irresistibly toward it. He did it with peace. He did it with going to the moon. He did it in his leadership, helping people to have a vision and then showing that the vision was and is within reach. How to achieve this? He says, don't fall into the trap of propaganda. Don't fall into the trap of thinking the worst of the other side. And he says that communication is essential. I say this every day, especially to the European leaders these days. They don't even try to talk to Russian counterparts. This is crazy. This is world threatening. The foreign ministers don't talk to the Russian foreign minister. I've been in meetings where they go out of their way to have no contact. The leaders of Europe don't even pick up the phone. I offer them my Zoom account every day. It is so dangerous, the lack of communication. Then President Kennedy goes on to say that no government or social system is so evil that its people must be considered as lacking in virtue. He praises the Russian people. We can hail the Russian people for their many achievements in science and space, in economic and industrial growth, in culture and in acts of courage. And he notes that no nation in history of battle ever suffered more than the Soviet Union suffered in the course of the Second World War. How extraordinarily correct and magnanimous of the president. And we just had the 80th anniversary of the defeat of Nazism. And the Western leaders wouldn't say one word about the Russian role in that defeat. The Soviet Union lost 27 million people. And these shockingly, I don't know the word, undiplomatic and unwise leaders couldn't say one positive word, couldn't include Russia in the memorials at concentration camps that the Soviet Union itself had liberated. How can we make peace with this kind of stupid hatred? But that's what is happening today, the opposite of what President Kennedy counseled and what he achieved. Then he notes that, ironically, no matter what, it's the US and Russia that are most at risk. And this is true till today. It is, we are at risk with the warmongering by the Europeans. We are at risk. I have to tell you the hard fact that when the SBU, the uh, intelligence services of Ukraine, go and destroy part of the Russian nuclear triad, part of the strategic bomber fleet last week, we are the ones whose lives are imperiled by that because Ukraine brought us closer to nuclear war last week. No, thank you. But no doubt it did it with the knowledge and probably the support of the CIA and the MI6 and other intelligence agencies. It's a disgrace. Then President Kennedy tells us something that is denied every day. We're told, oh, you can't make peace with that side. And President Kennedy says the opposite. Even the most hostile nations can be relied upon to accept and keep those treaty obligations, and only those treaty obligations, which are in their own interest. His point is that peace is in mutual interest. It's not a favor. It is the mutual gain of both sides. And then he has my favorite words pretty much of all time. I have to read them because I love them. So let us not be blind to our differences, but let us also direct attention to our common interests and to the means by which those differences can be resolved. And if we cannot end now our differences, at least we can help make the world safe for diversity. For in the final analysis, our most basic common link is that we all inhabit this small planet. We all breathe the same air, we all cherish our children's futures, and we are all mortal. So he lays it right on the line that we are a common humanity and we have our common interests, and because of that, we can make a common peace. He calls on us to persevere in the search for peace. And he tells us something which our leaders have absolutely abandoned, I have to tell you. And it's notable that he says, above all, in other words, of all the lessons that he has learned, of all that he is conveying, above all, while defending our own vital interests, nuclear powers must avert those confrontations which bring an adversary to a choice of either a humiliating retreat or a nuclear war. To adopt that kind of course in the nuclear age would be evidence only of the bankruptcy of our policy or of a collective death wish for the world. Do you know every day the Western governments are taunting President Putin, saying, oh, he's just bluffing. Don't worry about nuclear weapons. We're going to defeat President Putin. He's evil. We're going to defeat him. Don't worry about nuclear weapons. We are doing exactly what President Kennedy told us, above all, not to do. Do not put your adversary in the choice of either a humiliating retreat or a nuclear war. That is a death wish, and our leaders are doing that. President Kennedy also says our diplomats are instructed to avoid unnecessary irritants and purely rhetorical hostility. That is our daily reality. Purely rhetorical hostility. Oh, he's absolutely crazy, or this or that. We cannot survive if we follow that course. President Kennedy, bless him, says we seek to strengthen the United Nations. And he goes on to talk about international law. He talks about non-interference in the internal affairs of other countries, about a new effort to achieve world law, and about the need for understanding, which requires increased contacts and communication. And this is absolutely true in all parts of the world. I travel and work in all parts of the world, in the Middle East, with Iran, with China, with India, with Russia. I can tell you the level of communication is shockingly low. We're not talking to other places with respect, with dignity, with the attempt to understand and the attempt to resolve differences. President Kennedy talks about our long range goal of disarmament, how far we are from that today. He talks about the partial nuclear test ban treaty, although at the time of the speech, he's still hoping for a comprehensive test ban treaty, but the two sides were not able to resolve differences about how to monitor the treaty. So they went for an atmospheric test limit. But he said that this would place nuclear powers in a position to deal more effectively with one of the greatest hazards which man faces in 1963, the further spread of nuclear arms. And this is the point I mentioned earlier. The Partial Nuclear Test Ban Treaty was the stepping stone to the Non-Proliferation Treaty. Then President Kennedy, of course, says to achieve peace abroad, we need peace at home. And I remind you, this was at the height of the civil rights struggle. And this speech was given June 10, 1963. And on June 11, President Kennedy delivered the finest speech on civil rights ever given by an American president, back to back, where he talked about the basic truths that are as clear as that are as old as the scriptures and as clear as the United States Constitution. He had Martin Luther King stunned with the eloquence and with the power and with the commitment that President Kennedy showed to the civil rights cause. Notice that he says at the end of the speech, the United States, as the world knows, will never start a war. Alas, if only we had kept to that standard. We have started innumerable wars, I'm sorry to say. And this is something that we have to overcome in our foreign policy. But he bids us to be confident and unafraid and to labor on, not toward a strategy of annihilation, but toward a strategy of peace. How appropriate for June 10, 2025. Thank you very much. Thank you, Marty, for, as always, bringing us together to celebrate and learn from and, again, be recharged and inspired by this great wisdom.
Thanks very much, Jeff.